Welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast, where we talk to C-level leaders from across the payments landscape. We'll be discussing the products and services that impact the payment space today, as well as trends and predictions for the future of payments. We will also hear stories from our guests about their journeys to the top.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast. I'm your host, Greg Myers, and today's special guest is Ruston Miles, the founder and chief strategy and development officer at Bluefin. So, Ruston, thank you so much for being here, and welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Greg. Thanks for having me on.
All right, well, let's dive in. If you don't mind, tell our audience a little bit about yourself, maybe where you grew up, where you went to school, where you currently live, a few things like that.
Yeah, all over, right? So, my parents were originally Upers, Upper Peninsula Michiganders, right? But they had me in New Orleans. So these are two completely different experiences. So I was, went to school, was raised, et cetera, outside of, actually between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, and sort of a swamp area. That's where I grew up, and then moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is, the second New Orleans. So just kidding. I like to say downsized, from hurricanes to tornadoes. So definitely loving it out here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Went to college out here and eventually moved a good bit of my extended family out here and do like it. Turns out that Tulsa was a sort of a mecca, if you will, or a base for telecommunications, right? Because of Williams Communications, MCI, all these things that are now Verizon, but lots of other brands in this, because of the fact that they used a lot of the pipelines, post sort of oil delivery and energy delivery to put fiber optics and run these things around the country. So it turned out to be a great place when the World Wide Web came out in '94 to be here, right sort of at the epicenter of telecom. And then what do we do with payments in telecom? Well, that was the next thing. And so that took my 25-year career for the last quarter century out here and working payments through telecommunications.
Okay. All right. Well, let's dive in and discuss Bluefin. So tell the audience what Bluefin does.
Sure. When I started Bluefin 25 years ago, started it as a payment gateway. So it was a pure play payment gateway, developed by a frustrated user. The old story was working with some brands that we probably all know that weren't quite satisfying the needs of what I needed at the time, which was to bring payments to contact centers, call centers, things like this, where you've got hundreds, in cases, 1,000 people sitting in rooms taking direct response from television or these different things, campaigns. And so being in the middle of America out here, that is where a lot of contact centers kind of were, from time zone, from the way people sound on the phone, and also to the good interconnectivity. And so all of the payment gateways at the time were focused on e-commerce, shopping carts, these kinds of things, subscriptions. And it's like, well, we need something that actually can serve business when it comes to doing phone payments and real-time authorizations. So from there, the natural progression happened. Of course, we got into e-commerce and present kinds of things, Moto, which is what we were already doing. But then eventually you become an ISO for payments. And our brand Bluefin, my brand Bluefin that I had come up with, we were focused on larger kinds of organizations. So less like, all the other local credit card companies, .com, were all selling terminals from the boot of their car, going to the retail and restaurant things in the front row. And all of my businesses that I served were second story businesses, back in boiler rooms and contact centers and these kinds of places where you don't really even know that those businesses are there. It might be a group that sells, sign shop equipment to 60,000 sign shops across America. And they're working it all from, this 2-story building in Tulsa that you don't even know what's going on inside of there. Well, they need payments, right? And so that got us into ISO and payment processing. But because of those kinds of brands, we started getting into security pretty early on because we're doing lots of higher education institutions, nonprofits, of course, being out here in the Midwest, a lot of faith-based kinds of ministries and television, things like this. So a lot of these folks that really minded their brand more than maybe someone selling shoes. If they have a breach or they have a problem, well, they just start a new business, change from Steve's shoes to Jane's shoes and move on with life. Can't do that if you've got a loyal following, et cetera. So that got us into security well before PCI was a thing. This is like, it was CISP. It wasn't even called PCI at this time. And so we had to get in on that very earlier because of the folks that we were serving. And it was complicated because we were securing, not just websites and shopping carts, but physical things, virtual attendance, people working from home, people working from physical things, wires going, key loggers, all these kinds of different things that needed to be protected. Well, that got us into end-to-end encryption pretty early on, right? And then come along in 2012, merged the company with Capital Payments, and kind of came together. They brought sort of the ISO, the payment processing piece, and I brought the technology and the security. And they asked me like, okay, what's the next thing? What does the crystal ball say, Ruston? And I said, well, the crystal ball says P2PE. They're like, what? And I'm like, point-to-point encryption. PCI has a standard. No one has followed the standard. Standard might even be at risk of going away, but it is the answer to, because I was a telecom kind of person from my background with MCI, WorldCom and all that. And so I knew kind of how risky all this stuff was. You could see stuff going over the wires, and if it didn't take that much to be a hacker, if you can get in on the wire and pull the data off, even if it's encrypted, you might be able to get at it and decrypt it. It was sort of the Wild West, literally, at that point. And so I was kind of concerned. I could see, the two freight trains coming together 100 miles an hour at each other. And I said, we ought to do this P2PE thing, guys. So we invested into that. And a year later, as soon as we had our product out, the Target breach happened, which then turned into 1,000 credit card breaches a year, literally. And I'm not exaggerating. Some of those years, it was over 1,000 credit card breaches. We might have only heard of 20 or 30 in the news, but there was lots of them going on, down the stack. And all of a sudden, our company just started to 10x because we had the solution. Then we took that and said, gosh, we can't just use this for our own payment processing. That's going to limit it. And it's really hard to do. We were the first to do it in North America to be validated for this and audited. And so we said, let's go ahead and pull that apart and sell it to our competitors and make our competitors our partners. And now we have 130, gateways and processors. And, you can go look at our list, all of the big names out there, the cyber sources and these kinds of folks, all these payment gateways and processors, they're out there and they're partners of ours using point-to-point encryption as a service, but not using us for the payments. So we kind of started in gateway, the acquiring and processing, and then said, let's actually focus down and double down on security solutions and doing that. And so that's what really took the company into its third act, which was focusing on that. I think most folks know of us now as the P2PE company, P2PE as a service, and more recently P2PE as a proxy, which is sort of the thing that we've been doing for the last year or so, which is a way to implement this very hard thing to do with zero integration, zero lift, kind of like just send it through the tunnel and it's secured, right? We can get into the details at some other point, but it is that new elegant way to deliver what we do to make it easier and even faster to implement in the system. And that's what is generating a lot of the buzz and interest right now. But we started in the gateway, went on to the acquiring, picked up payment security, and then the company 10x'd, and that's what we do now. We're a payment security solutions company, and having to do that, extend that beyond payments, because these companies have way more to secure than just payments. And so our platform does healthcare, PHI, PII, all this other kind of privacy data as well, as anything that's involved with payments and non-payment data.
Okay. So your main customers are other payment companies and then maybe some in healthcare. Is that about right?
Yeah. I mean, our partners are payment gateways, payment processors, and software platforms. So you can think of all the ISVs and SaaS and practice management systems out there. Some of them go direct to the processors. They don't go through a gateway, right? And so they'll use us. Some of them go through a gateway that doesn't have P2PE. And so they'll say, you need to get P2PE, integrate with Bluefin for this, We have lots of the big enterprises out there and logos, obviously because we're part of their security posture. Don't like to talk about them on a public platform unless they're present or give specific permission. But you can think of 25% of the large airlines in the world, sort of like the largest rental, car rentals in the world, probably the largest petroleum gas station networks and stations in the country, all of the tubes and tolls and everything in London, and in Boston, et cetera, et cetera. Point being, the largest brands that you can think in the world, and retailers and malls and things like this, very, very, very super prominent brands, or flowing over our networks, either directly to us, or by driving their vendors to be required because they won't take it without point-to-point encryption, or by going direct. But I have to say, we are not a go-to-direct company. Usually these enterprises and these organizations are working with us because they already have so many things solved through other gateways and software, but they just really need that point-to-point encryption piece to be fully secure.
Okay. So you mentioned London. Does that mean you're a global company all over the world?
Yes. So obviously started the company here in Tulsa. Our headquarters are in Atlanta. Got folks around the country. Huge center of excellence and NOC and development out in Waterford, Ireland. We've got offices in Australia, Bratislava. Data centers in Germany, and we're definitely a global company with both employees and infrastructure, across North America and Europe. And we, of course, serve other areas of the world, but predominantly in those markets is where we would have our employees and infrastructure.
Well, it sounds like you were the first, but it's you're not the only one these days. So what would you say differentiates Bluefin from your competitors out there?
Yeah, I mean, so we were the first, and very much didn't want to be the only, because when a standard only serves one player, then it's not a standard. It's, you know what I'm saying? A standard is there so that you can create an ecosystem. And we wanted adoption, right? And in fact, part of the reason that we decoupled or componentized or worked with the PCI Council with our P2PE 2.0 standard to create a standard that would break apart the point-to-point encryption to like key injection facilities and HSM decryption entities, terminal entities, people creating devices, all these different kinds of entities. That's in the beginning with point-to-point encryption. It was all or nothing. You had to do the whole solution, get it all validated, or you couldn't just do one part. If you were a key injection facility or a KIF, you couldn't just do your part. You had to be part of a larger solution that was all audited. So we wanted that to be, in order for this thing to grow, it needed to be sort of federated and componentized. And so we very much pushed for that, which, scratch your head in the beginning. Didn't you want to rule the world, Ruston? Every business wants to be, build a monopoly, right? But that's just not the way my brain works. I'm like, if this thing really needs to grow, we need to have an ecosystem of participants, everybody doing their part. So we drove that, and then we created a platform called P2PE Manager, which allows them all to interface and do their various parts in it. So I'd have to say, when you ask what differentiates, every other solution out there is a solution. Every other solution in the PCI listing is, of which I would say 20% of the listings in the PCI listing for P2PE, of all those hundreds of listings, 20% or more are actually sub-listings of ours for other brands like white label, right? And then there are, hundreds, as I said, of folks out there using this, but who are just using our solution and taking the extra step to get their name, with us sort of being the Intel inside kind of situation, right? But the point is that we are a platform. We are a network. We are the sort of the back end provider of services to this industry, of which many of them are using. And all of the other guys out there are like, hey, I've got a POS and we built our own P2PE, or I've got a gateway out here, my payment gateway, and my payment gateway, we built P2PE for it. We decided not to, do it as a service with Bluefin, and we decided to do it ourselves. Those are great. Those are point solutions, because that one gateway may focus on retail. That one gateway may focus on hospitality, and they might be the best hospitality focused payment gateway with their own P2PE, in America. Okay, great. But that's one small vertical, large, one vertical and one usage point. And our system is across all verticals and basically a platform that serves that market. So there's nobody else, believe me, when you do these analysis and you try to do the quadrant and see who's where, there's nobody in our quadrant. And I know that's like, oh, it's always nice to see, the Venn diagram where you just kind of own the world. But it is true that it is very difficult to do this. It's very difficult to keep up with it. For example, we've got 150 different devices or so across 17 manufacturers. Like when you look at all the other solutions, they'll have like, oh, we're just an Ingenico shop, just one manufacturer, and these are the two devices, right, that we support. And so I think that's what we have is sort of that decade lead of that. And I don't see anybody else having a direct competitor as a as a service or as a platform offering, but certainly within verticals, like hospitality and retail, there are some great players, and I'm great to have the competition because that kind of drives it all forward.
Sure, absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit about the future. Where do you see payments in the fintech space headed in maybe the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, we're seeing this march to sort of eradicate, uh, you know, I would say eradicate primary account numbers or PAN or credit card numbers, moving towards network tokens, for example, maybe less dependence on cards. The idea was there to be more digital wallets. Now, if you're reading some of these things, you're like, well, gosh, with agentic AI agentic commerce and these things, wasn't that just going to leapfrog the wallet? Why do you even need to have a wallet, right? This is things to be secured. So I think we're going to see a lot of this agentic thing really transforming. I'm a big AI user, and it's almost frustrating to me when I'm dealing with vendors, that don't allow me to use it, for my Instacart or DoorDash or Uber Eats or all of my different things. So I think that's where the stuff is going. Does that mean that payments will go away? No, we always need payments. Does that mean payment security will go away? No, it becomes that much more important as we get closer to AI, as we get closer to quantum, as we get closer to these things. Payment security, payments. As I always like to say, payments, innovation should never outpace too far anyway. Payment security innovation. They should always be. You can't get the security before the innovation too much because it stifles the innovation. So you got to have that kind of going forward. But it has to be right there, nipping on the heels, not dragging it down so much, but making sure it doesn't just go off the tracks. And so that's really our mission, is to secure point-to-points, payments between 2 points. Point-to-point encryption is largely thought of as two hardware points. A credit card machine, it's encrypted, it goes through over here, it's encrypted over there. But really, we're about securing even virtual points. If that goes from inter-agentic commerce, or if that's between two token providers, et cetera, we are that, not just the physical, but also the virtual point-to-point security platform. And so that's where I think it's going, and why I think Bluefin has a bright future in that future.
Okay. So that agentic commerce, I mean, we've seen some announcements by some players, and, we were talking a little bit earlier offline about this. There's a lot of announcements. A lot of people say they're doing things, but no one's really committing, in my opinion, to do a whole lot. But I think everyone knows it's coming. And I know you're really involved in a lot of different organizations around AI. So kind of where do you think we are in that? Like, are we going to have agents buying things for us in the next year or two? Or do you think that's pretty far out?
Oh, I already do that like on a daily basis, man. So, I go to, for example, in the different GPTs and platforms have different uses. I would say, for example, the Perplexity, the Comet product, the agentic browser. So, I'll go in there, for my birthday, my sister sent over a Word document list that she had copied and pasted people's texts of what they wanted from this restaurant that I like, right? And so I just put that in to the AI and said, and I logged into my to DoorDash and said, go do all this. And it did it. And then it gets to the end. It's like, would you like me to click buy? Yes, click buy. Right. So that's happening today. I mean, I do all of my weekly ordering on Instacart, and I do all of my, anything that takes more than like 5 or 6 minutes to do when it comes to that stuff, I'm already doing that. Right. ChatGPT has a little bit different way that they deliver. It's not an agentic browser. It's sort of a virtual machine or virtual PC desktop that it uses. But I think they're going to be coming along pretty quick with their own agentic browser. So this is already being used largely as sort of, I would call, like commerce automation, right? But that next leap is when you not only just do commerce automation, where it's basically automating and being my agent to go out and make all the orders, but my credentials, my card number, my information still exists inside of Instacart or DoorDash. And all it's doing is calling up that credential and saying, yes, use that one. But it's not actually handling the payment outside of that platform. That next step is where it says, oh no, I've got the payments. I'm not going to trust Instacart or DoorDash or Uber Eats with this stuff. And when it comes time to pay, I'm going to hit, an MCP or an API or whatever, and that's tokenized, and I'm going to deliver payment because because now I trust perhaps my agent with my payment security more than I do that software or that platform, right? So now that platform can't breach my credit card information either because they don't have it. So now I grow even more trust. So I think it's going to get closer to that kind of thing. That's not here yet because right now it's more automation in the way that it's interacting, and we have to have those sort of protocol pipe tunnels where both sides can agree, and that there's a standard to say, okay, here's how I'm going to communicate to you outside of a web browser to communicate payment, or that payment has occurred and authentication has happened. So I think that is that next step, and we're not quite there yet. But right now, it's more automation based. So I believe that's what I believe, and I think the place where P2PE, not to get too heady on this, and then I'll give the mic back. But I think where P2PE will exist in that world is what I kind of call inter-agentic. So these are two agents, right? My agent and your agent I'm trying to send you some money, or you're trying to send me money, or we're trying to send something, and our agents are talking. Or maybe we're two businesses. So it's inter-agentic boundary mediation, right? So in other words, there's a boundary. My boundary is here, your boundary's there, and we're trying to authenticate each other, make sure Greg's Craig and Rusty's Rusty. We're communicating over here. So we're authenticated, and now we're passing data securely. And that encryption, or that point-to-point encryption, comes in virtually, I think, there, and now is able to mediate boundaries and pass data securely. And so I think that is the future, and I don't think that's far off. Last point there, when I built Bluefin, I started it in around 2002 timeframe. I was working on the World Wide Web in '94. Like, I was in an intern group in 1994 when the web came out. That was my job, was to figure out if this web thing could drive telecom traffic. Because they want to figure out how to drive more traffic. And they're like, emails and text on a web page, it's just never going to drive a lot of traffic. That was true. That was the truth. That's what they thought then. And you can imagine, what's that, 8 years later in 2002? That's almost a decade later. I was still the first real payment gateway provider to do real-time authorizations in a contact center with the web. So it took that long for that huge disruptive innovation to make it to a contact center. The world is different now, and it operates much faster. So I think the cycles with this AI thing are not going to be judged in decades, and probably not even years. I do believe that between now, call it 26 already, in the next 4 years will be a massive change in the way that we pay each other and get paid.
I guess for you, the beauty is those payments have to be secured, and so you're sitting in a great spot.
We hope so.
All right, well, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about you. And I know you've talked about your background a little bit, but maybe tell us about prepayments and kind of what you were doing, and then what really exactly happened that led you into starting Bluefin.
Okay, good question. Gosh, figure out where to start. So the very first business I started was selling music equipment, because at that time, I was a musician, so I'm from the New Orleans area. So you got to imagine, took 10 years of jazz drum lessons, played guitar on the side. When I went to college, started a band with guitar, won Battle of the Bands, because it was cool to suck at guitar for a little while there, and with the grunge era. You had to have good rhythm and know music, but you didn't have to be a shredder on the guitar. Well, then eventually you become good at guitar because you're playing live enough with it. And then also some folks only know me as a keyboardist or a piano player. So it's very much of a musician. And in buying music, you can only buy it locally. And so you had tax, and you also had, they'd double up the price. You could buy the stuff, mail order for half the price and no sales tax. And so I started a business doing that, and it actually took off. I got some fairly big contracts when I wasn't even 18 yet. I was 16, 17. And it took me to spend time abroad in Russia and in Mexico. Spent probably almost a year abroad before I graduated, because I was on the fast plan when it came to school. I don't know how you say that, but didn't Doogie Howser it quite, but finished early and had some time between that before going off to college. And so built that business, which got me in the bug of business. I mean, oh man, this is great. And also using, mail order, which, that's old school now, but it wasn't in the 1990. So, so that was pretty rad. And then I went to college, and, I had a choice to choose where I was going to go. And I made that choice based on Well, it was either going to be UIUC, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, which is where ARPANET or DARPANET invented the internet. So I was like, I'm going there, because I knew the web was going to change. I just didn't know how it was going to change or when it was going to change the world. But that was all inside of the engineering program. And they also had they still had modems in the dorm rooms, And so I found a university where it was like, they had a program, MIS, that was inside of the business program. And you did computer science, but it was business first with computer science. And they had a T1 on every floor. They had just invested, which was, if you remember back then, a T1 was like hugely fast. Of course, that's silly slow now, but that was several $1,000s a month you'd pay, maybe even $13,000 a month you'd pay at that time for a T1. Only businesses could afford this, but education had it. So I had to go to that university, right? And so that kind of just really put me on a fast track. I think gave me an unfair advantage of other folks at the same time working on the web, on things like this in other universities. They didn't have access to the speed, and they were in engineering and not coming from with the business and engineering perspective. So that just gave me a huge boost. Started interning at MCI WorldCom, entered a program there called STARS, Selection, Training, and Rotation, was supposed to come out a manager, and then Y2K hit. And I was the only person that, because I was in the rotation program, that knew what email administration, network administration, systems administration, calling, rating, all the different departments, across this vast telecommunications network, and they were also buying others, that knew what was going on because everybody was so siloed. So they put me in charge, and I look back, I'm like, Ruston, I wasn't even 21, and I was the Y2K, project manager for all of the WorldCom side of MCI WorldCom, which is now Verizon. Which means I got to miss Y2K and spend my night there running a command center, and all that stuff. But and as soon as that was done, they said, okay, that all went well, and we're going to sell off this entire group to EDS, I think it was at the time. And so EDS, had this non-compete. Now I realize as an older man that it probably wasn't enforceable, but as a young man, it just seemed like I'm never going to get to work again anywhere else. I had to make a decision. Am I going to branch out, start that business I always wanted to start, or am I going to take the corporate route? And it was a tough decision, Greg, but I took the let's go ahead and let's do this. And so went out, started the business. Wasn't Bluefin, but couple businesses later, and lots of learning and I'm glad I had the learning about learning how to work with other partners or not, and also, how to build a business that works for you, that you don't work in it. And then started Bluefin. At the time was Blue Financial, and it really kind of went up from there. But really, into music, into scuba diving, from New Orleans, like to cook, I'm a saucier. Like to try either a new sauce every week that I make, or take sauces and I have made and tweak them. So very much, more of a creative mind, but still do love to nerd out in the engineering details. So I like to play on both sides there.
Okay. So the next question was, what are your passions? So I think you mentioned all your personal passions, work related. It sounds like very technology driven. So just curious, any other passions within the work environment?
Yeah, I was passionate about payment gateway, built that. You get to a point where everything was going great. And then what started happening was you kind of hit a wall with payment gateways where all they could do then was lower their price and add more features, which is sort of like, you're 10 cents. Now you got to be sub penny. Oh, by the way, we need to have all these new features because there's so much more happening with digital payments. So it was kind of a runaway train the other way. It's like, it just didn't seem to be, it was the first 10 or 15 years of my work of the Bluefin career, but it just didn't seem to be a sustainable offering, right? And also with the advent of software, ISVs and SaaS, a lot of payment gateways did was just pre-packaging and pre-selling components or logic that was software anyway, so that the software companies didn't have to build recurrings, or they didn't have to build their own reporting from raw data, just making life easier for programmers and developers, right? But eventually they figure that out, and all they need are interfaces to talk to the payments, right? And they don't need a lot of the bells and whistles, at least if they're past that startup phase. So the passion kind of started to move to payment security, right? So payment security was, definitely a decade where I was the wild man in the wilderness about this P2PE stuff, right? I'm on the PCI board of advisors now, and have been for some time. And, so I very much will always be payment security evangelist. And I have to say, going back to the AI thing, I have been very much into that for the last year, which turns out to be a long time in AI time, and so that is where you see a lot of my writing, a lot of my interactions. I'm on 4 different AI committees for various industry associations across our world: ETA, RSPA, PCI, these kinds of groups. So very much a proponent of that, and not just because it's the cool thing, because I feel it's my mission to secure it for payments so that it all makes sense. Because I saw how many, being on the side of security for the last 10 or 12 years, I've seen how many organizations have limited their internal innovation in the things that they would go out and adopt for, like, mobile payments, or bringing the payments out to the customers rather than the customer coming to them. And all these large enterprises, because of security, how they kind of held up innovation and making life easier for the experience for everyone involved, right? And then once, if they finally got, oh, wow, it doesn't matter what software you use as long as it's encrypted and tokenized, then all of a sudden it's back open. Well, we can do all these things. And then all of a sudden you see this huge, big innovation. And I'm like, my goodness, not to pat myself on the back, but I'm glad I did that, because you wonder, to a certain degree, all those hard times, wild man in the wilderness, trying to tell everybody, prophesize about, hey, there's an easier way to do this, running myself ragged 200,000 miles a year on planes. And then all of a sudden you see, okay, there's liftoff. I feel like I don't want AI to have to go through that same thing where everyone's like, we can't use AI until it's secure. Yes, agentic commerce. Yeah, but what happens over here? What's over there? It's like, no, let's have real clear platforms, products, protocols, lanes. Let's have things that everybody already trusts, like point-to-point encryption. How do we implement that over here? Things that are already known and credible, and how do we put them in the right places so that there's not this big half a decade hiccup with this move towards AI? Because I truly believe that AI is as much or more of a change than the World Wide Web is. And I'm just so lucky to have my first year in college be 1994, which was the first year the web came out. And I'm kind of seeing this as like, okay, this is that second chance in life where you're like, this is that next big thing that's going to maybe even have that much more relevance, 10 or 20 years from now, or 5 or now, or even now. And so I feel that as my mission and my passion to bring payment security into that.
Okay, great. Thanks for sharing that. So obviously you've been in payments for a long time. So if someone came to you and they're maybe wanting to start a career in payments, maybe they're moving over from another industry, what kind of advice would you give them to help them have a successful career in payments?
Man, that advice would have changed 4 or 5 times over the last 25 years. Yeah. So, now it's okay to be a nerd. It's okay to be a payments nerd. There was a time when payments was very, very specific, right? And it was a certain kind of person, and maybe I don't know. It was different, I have to say. Folks like you and me were probably unique 10 or 20 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago in the payment space that are having conversations like this. It was either selling devices or getting lower rates, or trying to figure out how to bring down fraud and risk, or something like this, which is important, but it was a little more e-commerce centric, or whatever, or retail centric in these boundaries. I think that all that stuff's kind of going away. We're starting to see more open banking concepts coming, from the East, and from our European side. We're starting to see more privacy things happening. We're starting to see more open to new kinds of payments, stablecoin, network tokens. We're seeing a lot of things happening on a faster timeline. I would say that for someone new coming in, be curious, be prepared. Used to be like, that's the business guy and he's going to run the business thing, and that's the tech gal and she's going to run the tech lane. And it's like, man, you really do need to understand maybe more than the basics about how things work, because sometimes that is the angle, that's the lever that's going to drive the business thing, that's going to make things happen. And the ingenuity and the innovation that you're going to provide may have a technical twist. And so you're as a founder really need to understand this stuff. Doesn't mean you have to be an engineer, but it does mean that you need to have a good understanding of payments. So I'd say be prepared, be curious, don't be afraid to be a nerd, and don't be afraid to get in a little bit over your head. Maybe even a lot over your head. When I got into payments, it's that onion thing. And I'm sure you've been in payments for a while too. It's like, as soon as you figure out what a gateway is, there's acquiring, there's issuing, there's security, there's how things happen internationally, there's optimization, and you just keep learning and learning and learning. And I'm still learning after a quarter of a century, about the things. You could still find the back end settlement and clearing and all the different things that go on. And then you add in the banking side, which is getting all mixed up in that as well. Where it's just, there's no end to learn. So be curious, be always learning, be okay to just, to be in a situation where you don't know everything. Because I think some folks need to know everything before they take that step, and you will never know everything in payments. And as soon as you know everything, boy, it's going to change next year anyway. So in some cases, it's easier for the newer folks to surpass the older folks because they're not dragged behind by what they know. So they can just come in and be like, hit the ground running. Here's the new paradigm. Let's go make this happen. So I think it's a really great time to be in payments, far more accessible than it was when I got into it. You know what I'm saying? So it's certainly, and it's getting so much more software. We say software is eating payments, but it's an interesting one. But I would say they're past eating it; they're digesting it now. We'll see what happens on the other side of things. But it's so much now becoming combined with where does software start and payments stop and all of that. That if you're just a software person that's interested in payments, go for it, get into it. You can figure this stuff out, and before you know it, they'll have you speaking on a panel. So it's certainly it's like when GarageBand came around, like, I can make some music that actually sounds great at home. When I was making music back in the 80s, you better get ready to drop 20, 30 grand on a home studio if you really want to make music. And now you get GarageBand and an Apple, boom. So payments is getting more like that.
Okay, great. I think that's great advice. So, Ruston, it's been a great conversation so far. So is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up the show?
No, I'm just saying, we're at Bluefin, we're passionate about payment security. We're passionate about where payments are going through this whole agentic AI piece of it. And we're not just, we're trying to rethink how we deliver things as well. I oftentimes will talk to folks about Bluefin and they're like, "Oh, you're that gateway," or they'll be like, "Oh, you're that this." It's like, yes, if any company that's been around for a quarter of a century is going to have done a lot of things, right? And so you've got a lot going on, but we are rethinking what we do all the time, and actually oftentimes finding areas in the space that we're still pioneering even in, and helping drive what the standards should be. But yeah, I'm excited to be here. Definitely, excited to be in this business and still excited about it after all this time, which not a lot of folks can say about the businesses that they're in. So I think we're lucky. My dad's a civil engineer, and so, he kind of did the wires and the plumbing and the walls, and that was a very exciting thing for his 50-year career, building up sewers and Mackinac Island and, all these different things. And like, okay, but all of a sudden, all that stuff, they put up the walls and you don't even know how it happens. You just turn on the electricity and it works. You just turn on the water. So I know that my role as a civil engineer of payments and payment security has probably at some point, everyone's going to be like, "Oh, do you know people had to figure all this stuff out at one point?" So I know there's, it's all marching towards that. And I'd like to look back on my career and be like, yeah, I was a part of making all this stuff disappear into the walls, but be absolutely dependable, resilient, and secure.
Okay. Well, Ruston, thank you so much for being on the show today. I know your time is very valuable, so I really appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Greg.
And to all you listeners out there, I thank you for your time as well. And until the next story.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Leaders in Payments podcast. Make sure you visit our website at leadersinpayments.com, where you can subscribe to the show and where you'll find our show notes. If you enjoyed listening, please share on your social channels as well.